Smoke coming to my tailpipe? That's not good. Great! Hey friends, it's Len here from 1A Auto. So today in the studio we have a first generation Scion XB. And I know, it's pretty much a Toyota. But of course, it is still going to have some of the problems of its own, as you saw with the smoke coming out the tailpipe. Now we're going to go over some of the top problems, and we're going to get to the smoke part coming out the tailpipe a little bit further towards the end. So let's start off with problem number 5. But before we go ahead and get under the hood, make sure that you get all of your parts from 1AAuto.com. Now for our 5th most common problem, we're going to start off talking about oil consumption. On these particular vehicles, of course it is a Toyota engine. They go for miles and miles, 200 plus sometimes. Now with that said, if you're not keeping up on your maintenance / oil changes, it's very common for your piston rings to get worn down. When that happens, of course, oil is going to be able to seep by. It's going to make its way into that combustion chamber, get burnt up inside the combustion chamber, and then get shot right out that tailpipe. But what you're probably going to notice is every time you get under the hood to check your oil, more than likely you're going to have to do it pretty much every time you fill up at the fueling station. Now, how do you even know that you're low on oil? Typically, if you're driving around and you can hear a little bit of a rapping noise coming from the engine, especially under acceleration or putting it under load, generally that means that your oil level is low. So you're going to want to go ahead and make your way underneath the hood to check it. Now, of course, to go ahead and fix this, you could try to do a couple oil changes back to back after 1,000 miles or so. Generally, the detergent inside of that oil is going to go ahead and try to break down any carbon deposits that are on the piston rings, and typically it might clean it down a little bit. For me personally, if I can get rid of it just by doing a couple oil changes back to back, that's the way to go. Now, since we just finished talking about low oil level and what can happen, let's also talk about our problem number 4, which comes down to a VVT solenoid. The VVT solenoid is going to be located on the passenger side front of your engine. And what's the purpose of a VVT solenoid? Variable, valve, timing, solenoid. That solenoid needs to be well lubricated by oil flowing through the system. If your oil level is low, because maybe for some reason you haven't been keeping up with it, and as we know, it consumes a little bit of oil, well then of course you're going to find that you have an issue with the VVT solenoid. Symptoms that you're going to find is that you have a runnability issue. Maybe it runs a little bit rough, or even maybe you have a check engine light that comes on. Once you go ahead and pull that check engine light code, it's going to tell you you're having an issue with the VVT solenoid. For me personally, typically if I have that, I generally like to check the oil level first. I'm going to make my way there, make sure it's up to par, make sure it's also clean, because if it's extremely dirty, you're going to have another issue with that VVT solenoid. So make sure it's clean. If you need to do an oil change, go ahead and do an oil change. After that, make sure that you go ahead and clear that check engine light and take it for a road test. Assuming the light does not come back on, you should be good to go. If the light does come back on and it says you have an issue with the VVT solenoid, go ahead and take out that 10mm headed bolt, pull it right off of there, and go ahead and replace it. Now that's enough talking about the engine. Well, for now, let's get inside the passenger compartment. Now for the 3rd problem, we're going to talk about your air conditioning not getting cold enough. Now, of course, you have your gauge right inside this area where you can turn it from either the hot position to the cold position. But what you might notice is when you're trying to go from hot all the way down to cold, the air doesn't necessarily seem like it gets very much colder. It might cool down a little bit, but it's definitely not blowing very cold for some reason. The most common issue for this particular problem is actually located right behind here. So all you'd want to do is just go ahead and take off this faceplate right here, and behind this knob, you're going to end up finding that there's a cable there. The cable itself can come unattached from its mounting point, and when that happens, while you're trying to do this, instead of the inner portion of the cable moving like it should, the inner and the outer portion moves, and in which case, it's not turning it to the cold position as needed. Now, if I was trying to fix this, the first thing I would do, like I said, would be to make my way behind here, and I want to inspect that cable. I'm only going to be able to see one side of it, essentially right behind here, but it does actually lead all the way back to the box where that actuator is going to be. So you want to make sure that you check both sides. So now that we've talked about temperature control issues on this, let's also talk about a strange squealing noise coming from the rear brakes in reverse. Alright, so now that I have the drum off of here so we can have a closer look at everything, the first thing that I'm going to talk about is the drum. It's going to be very common for you to have some sort of buildup along the ridge of the drum right here. And when that happens, it could potentially hit up against the backing plate located right there. Aside from rot potentially being either on the backing plate or even on the drum, you might find an issue with the brake shoes themselves. That's this area right along here. It's going to be very common for these shoes to get worn down. Of course, every time you brake, it's going to cause friction and wear these down. But generally what happens is if you were to look along the very edge of the shoe, the meat of the shoe, you're going to see a whole bunch of buildup in that area. So if any of the rust happened to have piled up in this area and you're driving forward, it's going to accumulate here. Once you try driving backwards and step on the brake, it'll break free, make its way into the bottom of the drum, and get stuck in that position. So then when you're driving, you're going to start hearing like a grinding or even a scraping noise coming from one side of your rear brakes. So either go ahead and clean it down and put it back together, or replace things as needed from 1AAuto.com. Okay friends, so stick with me here. We're on to our top problem, problem number 1. For this one, you already saw it. We had white smoke coming out of the tailpipe on this thing. Also, I noticed that I had a check engine light on, and if I was looking at this engine, I could see that it was running a little funny, essentially a misfire. Now, why would it have white smoke coming out of the tailpipe? Typically, that's telling you that you have coolant that's making its way into areas that it shouldn't be. All you'd want to do to fix this would be, of course, to remove the valve cover up along the top. After that, you're going to start unbolting things so you can get the head right off of the bottom there, which is where the block is. That area right there is going to be where that gasket's located, the head gasket. If the head gasket is worn, torn, or damaged in any way, of course, you're just going to go ahead and replace that, replace all other gaskets along the way, and of course, inspect everything. Okay, friends, so that's what I've got for you for top problems on this Scion XB. Keep in mind, the Scion is technically a Toyota, so overall it's going to be an extremely dependable vehicle, and it's going to get great fuel economy overall. Of course, every vehicle has its own problems. We just kind of want to go over a couple of them for you to think about. I hope you liked the video. I hope you learned a little something. If you liked the video, go ahead and smash on the like button for me. It would mean the world. While you're at it, subscribe, ring the bell. That way there you can be kept up with all of our latest content. Thanks.